No.
chocolate raspberry?
No.
No chocolate raspberry?
The point is, we're not combining the chocolate and the strawberry.
Yes, donut.
Yes. Or vanilla chocolate.
A black and white donut.
Yes, perfect.
That'll be good.
Yeah, that will be good. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. I am here at the King Arthur Studio, and today I'm showing you a recipe from my new book. The book is called What's for Dessert, and it's filled with really approachable, streamlined recipes for desserts of every kind. So I have a chapter in the book on stovetop desserts, and today I'm showing you a recipe from that chapter. It is my classic sour cream cake donut. They are easier to make than you would think. It skips over some of the more tedious steps of cake donut making, and I'm also gonna kind of go over best practices for deep frying. I think it's less scary than you think it is, very doable at home, and I'm gonna show you how to make these really nostalgic, beautiful, classic cake donuts. So in order to still have that like approachability and accessibility, I keep the recipe really, really simple. So this is a very basic cake donut. It's a sour cream batter, and it's entirely makeable by hand, very straightforward, basic ingredients, because I think the hard part is the deep frying, but it's not even that hard. So we'll get to that. But I'm gonna start by putting together the cake batter. So I'm using cake flour. That's really important. It has a lower protein content, so cake flour produces really tender and light baked goods. So we want a very, very light cake donut. And the batter is a little bit of a looser batter because I'm gonna pipe them into rings and not have to roll them and cut them. So for the dry ingredients, I'm gonna start just by weighing the flour. Okay, so 295, it took a long time. So then I'm just going to add my other dry ingredients. So I have baking powder and baking soda. The batter has sour cream in it, so there's acidity from the sour cream, so that little bit of baking soda helps to lighten them quite a bit. My nutmeg, I have like a real sensitivity to nutmeg. To me, an overwhelming amount of nutmeg has like a real kind of medicinal flavor, but in small quantities, it just adds like such a nice warmth. So I really like it in the donuts. And then salt. So cake donuts typically have like a lot of leavener in it just because, it goes into that hot oil, and you get, there's no other you get the rise from basically like a lot of baking powder, baking soda. But you don't want to add so much that you can taste it. So I'm just gonna whisk that together. This is a little bit of a wetter batter than you might be used to if you've made cake donuts before. So it's like a little bit looser. So oftentimes a cake donut has a pretty stiff batter because you have to roll it out and cut out your donut shapes. So for me, it was like, do I want people to have to use a cutter or a pastry bag? And I felt like the pastry bag was easier for a couple reasons. One is like you could just use like a Ziploc bag, but also I think it's easier. Like you're not dealing with trying to roll out this sort of sticky dough and then, cut shapes and then re-roll and adding flour and all that. So that was sort of my judgment call. So the whole egg adds some moisture. I'm gonna add my 2 yolks. That gives it a little extra richness. And then I'm gonna add the sugar. So I wanna do this until this mixture is nice and like thick and light and kind of airy. So I think in the recipe I say moussey, kind of has like a moussey finish. Okay, so this looks good. It's thickened, it's really kind of gained some volume, it's pale, it's nice and light. I'm now gonna stream in my melted butter, melted and cooled. So this is 4 tablespoons. And this will emulsify into my egg and sugar mixture. Okay. So this is the base, and now I'm going to add my dry ingredients and my sour cream alternating. So this is sort of like common cake method. So I'm gonna start with my dry. I'm gonna do dry in 3 additions and sour cream in 2 additions. And this is 3/4 cup of sour cream. It's room temp, also important. So still using the whisk, and kind of eyeball it. And even though I'm using cake flour, which does generally produce like lighter, more tender baked goods, I still don't want to over whisk. So I'm gonna I whisk until the flour almost disappeared, and then I'm gonna add about half of the sour cream. mix that. And I love the tenderness that it contributes, but also just like the little bit of tang. It just adds a lot of flavor. I love baking with sour cream. Then half of the remaining flour, or a third of the total. So that's mostly incorporated. Then the remaining sour cream. And now I'm gonna add the remaining dry ingredients, and then I'm just gonna fold everything with the spatula, because at this point, you're gonna get a sort of a thicker batter. It's gonna be a little harder to whisk. So you can see this is, like if I were to be making donuts that I were to roll and cut, I would have to make a stiffer batter. And so that would lead to like a drier cake donut. So this is a method that I felt like it just makes sense for a lot of reasons. It's like you get a more tender donut, they look better, they're more consistent, and I think it's actually just like an easier process. And they're all nice and soft and tender. Oh, I didn't add the vanilla. I meant to add it with the sour cream. I was like, I used everything. And then there's the vanilla off to the side. All right, 2 teaspoons. Okay, so you can see this looks like a really thick cake batter. Now I'm going to transfer it to my piping bag. So to fill it, you can do it with one hand where you're like holding the bag with one and filling with the other, but it's a little bit hard. So a good tip is to have like a tall, like a quart-sized container like this one, or a pint glass, something that shape. And you put the bag inside, fold the top of the bag down, and then it just supports itself to make it easy to fill. And I do think it's easier with a stiffer batter like this. You want to minimize air pockets. So that's kind of the most important step at this point, is to try to fill the bag so that you're not making like you're not forming big air pockets, because that will cause a break in your piping when you go to form the donuts. When you hit an air pocket, that line will break. So here I have the batter. Now this makes about a dozen donuts that felt like the right amount, but depending on how you pipe them, you might get one more or one less, which is normal. So you can use like a bench scraper for this, or just like your hand to sort of force all of the dough down into the bottom of the bag, and then gather the ends and twist to seal. Okay, so I'm going to make my 3 frosting. So I have 3 flavors. I have a strawberry frosting, a vanilla frosting, and a chocolate frosting. And so they are all really easy kind of stir together things. Powdered sugar. I'm using, as a base of the frosting, I'm using sour cream. So we already put sour cream in the donuts themselves. So like it's just easy to use the same ingredient in the frosting, plus it adds some tang and some body and some fat. So it's just a great way to temper some of the sweetness. I mean, these are sweet frostings. It's a lot of powdered sugar to thicken it, but it's not a very sweet donut, so it goes really well. So whisk it really vigorously until it smooths out. So I'm gonna set this aside. And then the process for making the other frostings is even simpler. It's just like whisk everything together. Okay. So basically, I'm gonna make around 12 donuts. So I'm gonna cut 12 pieces of parchment paper to fit in my half sheet tray. And so these are like little landing pads for the donuts. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is a relatively loose dough for cake donuts. And so it would be very difficult to like lift up the dough and somehow transfer it to the hot oil. And so basically the parchment is like your vehicle. You can lift up the entire square and put the donut into the oil really seamlessly. It's very clean. There's no like oil splashing. So it's just, this is like that sort of extra step, but again, I think it's much easier still than rolling and punching out donuts. So I have my piping bag of dough. This has been sitting for, I don't know, maybe like half an hour or so. You don't want it to sit like for many, many hours or overnight, because that baking powder, baking soda will kind of lose some of its oomph. But you can definitely let it hang out for an hour or 2. So I'm gonna snip like an opening about 1.25 inches. And it's pretty specific about the size, because that is going to pipe like the right sort of thickness of ring for your donuts. But it's not that big of a deal if you make them smaller or larger, because your yield will just be affected. You might have 12 donuts, or you might have 11 donuts instead of 12. It's not that important. Yes? Oh God, did I make it too big? I don't know if I think it's fine. Okay. Basically what I'm going for is a ring of dough that's about 3 inches in diameter with a 1-inch opening in the center. So once you come back to the point where you started piping, overlap a little bit to sort of like join the 2 ends. Okay, so now let's see where my oil is. I'm at 340, so I'm happy with that. I might turn it up 1 little notch. And now I'm ready to fry basically as soon as my oil comes up to temp, but there is one little step you can do to help give your donuts a nicer overall shape. And that is to like just dip your finger in a little bit of water. I have just a little bowl of water here, and go ahead and smooth that joint where the 2 like ends of the ring meet. You don't want to like add a lot of water because water and hot oil are not a good combo, but you just need enough that your finger is not going to stick. That's really all this is about. Now for this, it matters, it depends on the surface area of the oil, like how many you can fry at a time. In a wider Dutch oven, you can fit more. I feel like for this size pot, I'm probably good with like 3 at a time. So I'm going to just lower it in. And it's gentle bubbling, and it will sink to the bottom at first, and then as all of that leavener heats up and it starts to bubble, see it's already bobbed to the surface. So you can see it's a nice gentle bubbling. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit because as soon as you add something room temp to the oil, the temperature of the oil will drop. So I'm going to lower them in. And now, as they bob to the surface, you can gently like slide off the parchment paper. And with these donuts, you don't want to fry them too low because that tends to promote like oil absorption. And there's always some oiliness to cake donuts, but I don't want them to be like heavy laden with oil. But if you fry too hot, then what happens is the exterior sets too quickly and you don't get as much like puffing, and sometimes the center can stay like doughy. I don't want that either. So 350 is a good middle ground. I actually did 2 batches in this oil and I turned it off. So make sure that you turn off the oil. We're just gonna let it like gently come to room temperature, and you can reuse fry oil a couple times. The color will darken, and sometimes what happens when you put food in is it will foam rather than bubble, and that's just kind of a sign that like your oil is spent. So I'm ready to frost them. This is very exciting. And so I uncovered the frostings. They've been sitting just as long as it took to pipe and fry the donuts, so not that long. They've set up really nicely. So here's the chocolate. You can see this consistency is same thing where it's like it's thin enough to run off a spatula, but it definitely has more of like a frosting consistency than a glaze consistency. And they're warm but not hot. So these have had several minutes to cool. And I'm going to just dip like one side down into the frosting. And I like to give it a wiggle so that the textured surface has a chance to pick up the frosting, so I get like a nice full coverage. If you feel like you glaze one and the glaze is sort of running off, it might be that your donuts were a little bit hot, but it might just be that it's too thin. So you can always adjust as you go and add powdered sugar or a little bit of liquid if you need to. As I said, if you made just one frosting, you would have enough for all 11, 12, 13, however many donuts you get. I did all 3, so I have frosting left over. You could like reuse this. You can store it in the fridge. But we've glazed all of them, and they're already starting to set, and now is the point where once the frosting is set, now it's like eat them as fast as you can. Oh my God, it's 1:59. David, you have 1 minute. Do you want to switch? Wait, switch places.
Are you
Switch. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, go. Pour it in.
I don't understand why we're doing this.
That looks great.
I'm glad this video is going to be out there, because people are going to see the real Claire Saffitz.
Okay, now, but look how good it looks.
That looks great. I might eat that. It looks like pudding.
It does look like pudding. I think it's good.
Okay, now I'm gonna
Yeah.
wiggle.
Yeah.
Okay. Like a comb
It's
over.
beautiful.
Hello.
Comb over. Like it's very.
It's very crispy. I can tell it's got like this like crispy shell. on
Yeah.
it, which not all donuts have.
Exactly. My thoughts exactly.
First of all, sprinkles are bringing a very nice crunch. But it doesn't really need crunch. It's got that crispy outside. It's so good.
Yeah, I do think it's a
So
nice
this is
texture.
the nostalgic donut of my childhood, but my donut of my childhood was much denser.
I thought you were going to say much better.
No, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
oh,
This is a lot
stop
better,
it.
yeah.